How'd you, what is this? Are you the center?
She was a third.
That's what I was going to do.
No, we just wanted someone here. Nobody was here for the changeover. Yeah. Do you guys feel like you might have been at the earpieces, or you think you
No.
Yeah.
Somebody go find Molly. Sort of wait.
Waters?
I got one.
Super interesting. Oh, yeah. Here's shot. Yeah.
Yeah, too bad Steve couldn't make it. I think he got held up in travel.
Here,
He's in Boston.
He's in D.C., but he was traveling here this morning. But there was some kind of big storm that was delaying people's flights
Yeah.
to Dallas. So, like, if there was flights delayed getting into Dallas, then they got slipped, and then all this other stuff was trickling on down.
Well, that's no good.
I know.
doing it.
I mean, it's you guys. Whenever you guys want to start. The sooner we start, the sooner we get to go have some beers.
Yes.
Let the collisions begin.
Hope that's okay.
All right.
Totally gonna make it weird.
Hey, Mark, you want to announce out there that we're going to start? I've got one.
Everybody has one. Okay.
Well, you guys will share that one. Okay.
Okay. I don't share well.
You want to tell the world that we're going to do this?
Yeah.
What's that? Yeah. Oh, sure, you can do that. No, we don't need to start. I was going to say, you tell the folks that sign. No, you tell the folks that sign.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah.
Let's go make it now.
Good afternoon. Is everybody having a good time today? Everybody finding what they're looking for? Who here was looking for an interesting company with an interesting solution to solve an Air Force problem? Okay, you guys need to redo this thing because apparently it ain't working. All right, so my name is Kevin Lantroop. I am the Defense Venture Partner at Capital Factory. My role is to make sure everything up on the 8th floor, which is the center of gravity for defense innovation in Texas, gets connected in the right ways, that we support our Air Force, Army, Defense Innovation Unit, NGA, Texas Military Department, customers who are here in-house, and then all of the other government innovation cells that are passing through our halls on a weekly and monthly basis. I'm here to make sure that we create really good opportunities for our startups, and we make sure that our startups know how to take advantage of those opportunities and are postured to do so. And then we create the pipeline of programming and interesting events like this one that brings it all together. So this panel is going to be about using the SBIR program to develop dual-use solutions for multi-domain operations problems. And sitting next to me are Matthew Scott, the lead for AFWERX in Austin, Tony Perez, the director of the Spark program for AFWERX, Larson Jensen, co-founder of Harpoon VC, also a former Navy SEAL and Olympian, and Jason Ballard, the CEO of local Austin startup and a Capital Factory portfolio company, Icon 3D. So I'd like to start, and we can just kind of go left to right, and I'll let each of you introduce yourselves and talk about what your organization is and why you're here.
Yes, Matthew Scott again, run AFWERX Austin. One of the things I just wanted to mention about that capability is we are building out contracting capability here in Austin to support AFWERX General to work with government DoD end users. I'm also the program manager for 19.2, and I also will be it for 19.3 as well. I'm instituting a training program to bring on more evaluators, more teams for that, so to help scale that program out.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. My name is Larson Jensen. I'm a co-founder and partner of Harpoon, and our key function is to help bring best-in-class technology that's otherwise not breaking in the defense space to solve warfighter problems. We've evolved a little bit over the past couple years, and more recently, we are a traditional venture fund backed by some of the firms that I previously worked with in Silicon Valley. Our insight is that there's a whole host of technologists that don't know that there's opportunities like this to engage the warfighter and support them and bring their product to market in this segment, and that's what we're ultimately trying to invest in and connect the dots between.
Yeah, I'm Jason Ballard, the CEO and co-founder of Icon. So the big question that gets us out of bed every morning at Icon is, you know, it's 2019 or about halfway through 2019 now. What if you could download and 3D print a building or a home in 24 hours for half the cost? Right, so that's like the big kind of crazy idea that gets us out of bed in the morning. So we're a construction technologies company using 3D printing. We work in 3 primary verticals. One is, as you might imagine, large-scale robotics. Number 2 is software, both operations software, and then imagine like an app store for homes, like sort of scroll through, pick a building, hit print, that kind of idea. And then advanced materials, because we're using like a cementitious proprietary concrete material to get concrete to do what we need it to do, take some fancy footwork. And so robotics, software, advanced materials, originally founded with this idea of working on the global housing crisis, whether it's from an affordability standpoint, a resiliency standpoint. That's kind of how we came to market. But because of the Capital Factory ecosystem, it turns out if you can build resilient buildings, or as the military would say, survivable buildings, very quickly and at a much lower cost, the Defense Department is very interested in well. So that's how I ended up on this stage. We just got through a SBIR Phase 1 and are now have a customer for SBIR Phase 2. So happy to share the journey.
So I'm Tony Perez, the director of Spark for AFWERX. What gets me up in the morning? Normally I gotta urinate, but that's a whole nother thing. So I mean, it's really working with, this incredible host of entrepreneurs that are looking to enter into the DoD ecosystem. I am mainly focused, and the Spark program is mostly focused on the demand side of the equation. So if you have to look at the warfighter and their needs and understanding them and give them regional pathways to get to a solution, that's what I'm interested in. And so it's, you know, the supply side of the early stage, non-traditional startups, companies, whatever, but also understand the demand side and giving those entrepreneurs within the DoD regional pathways to get to solutions.
Awesome. So as we were getting ready for this panel, Matthew gave me a list of questions to go through, and today's my birthday, so I threw that list away, and I said I can ask whatever I want. So I'm going to start with Jason. So tell us about your product. Tell us about Vulcan, how it's evolved. If you're inclined to do so, tell us about, you know, some cost parameters for building that system and what you're doing with it.
Yeah, so our claim to fame, or sort of when we first popped up on everyone's radar, the idea, the very romantic idea of 3D printing buildings or homes has been around for about 2 decades now. But we kind of popped up on the radar about a year and a half ago now at South by Southwest in 2018 here in Austin. We unveiled what was the first permitted 3D printed building in America. And so it sort of was finally, this thing is real. That building was about 350 square feet, and we printed it with a machine called Vulcan 1, not because we're Star Trek nerds, because it was like, what else moves liquid rock that gets hard? It's like volcanoes, but Vulcan sounds cooler, so we'll call it Vulcan. So the Vulcan 1 was what printed that, but it was kind of a Wright Brothers airplane. It was a real kind of duct tape and bubble gum machine, but it did it. And so when that transition from science fiction to reality is kind of what put us on the radar. And so we raised a seed round of capital and started upgrading our technology stack based on everything we had learned from printing that house. We recently printed our second house here in Austin. We haven't announced it yet. It'll be announced around September 10th, so stay tuned. But it is twice as large, and we printed it in half the time. So for everybody doing the math, that's like 4x the speed per square foot in 1 year of progress. The materials itself that we're printing out of, we call it Lavacrete. We have this volcano thing going on. So Lavacrete 1 that we printed the first house with had a compressive strength of about 3,000 PSI. That's about twice the compressive strength of like lumber or CMU block. Our new Lavacrete has a compressive strength of 6,000 PSI, which somebody in this whole journey told me was strong enough to count as a military-grade landing strip. So it's quite resilient, quite strong, and we're really proud of it. And so that's kind of the state of the union. There's a lot of room to grow. Kind of up in front of us soon, I'm actually heading out to Latin America. I just got back from Latin America, going back down there on Friday. We're going to begin printing the world's first 3D printed neighborhood. And then we have another project here in Austin kicking off this fall that you'll hear more about soon, I hope, as well. But one of the fun things we'll be doing in that project is we'll actually be printing 3 houses at a time in a similar kind of time frame. So like moving really fast at a high velocity. Our goal that I talk about is like half-price homes, right? If you from the private sector side, it's not going to help us to make homes like 5% faster, 10% cheaper. Like I think the average cost of a home is $400,000, and so if you make it 10% cheaper, it's $360,000. And so like if you can't afford a $400,000 home, a $375,000 home is probably not doing it for you either. And so like we're going to need solutions on the order of magnitude of like cutting things in half and going twice as fast. What that will do for the defense application, we believe, as we're going through this research application, is typically the Department of Defense and the various branches of the military have had to choose between like rapidly deployable shelters and buildings, which are notoriously not survivable because they're either like fabric or some kind of plywood, or it takes a very long time to like approve funding to get set up with like a real like, kind of entrenched installation or buildings. And so we sort of provide this like interesting sweet spots. Like we can go very fast. Just sort of pick the building you want to print and hit print once you've set the machine up. So we can go very fast like a tent, but are much more resilient and safe for the various members of the armed forces. And so half price is the goal, to circle back on that. Depending on your design, the state of the union right now is we tell people about a 30% cheaper, so to just pick any house, and we're about 30% cheaper than whatever you're pointing at. There are some applications where we appear already to be half price. That especially happens on like higher end things, like a house that looks like a $500,000 house is very easy for us to do for $250K. It gets harder when you get like to the low end. If a house that's already $120,000, there's not a lot of fat on the bacon. So for the very, very low end houses out in the private sector, we tend to be about 10% cheaper. But you're getting a much, much better product, because to build a house out of conventional materials that cheap, my grandpa used to say, there's almost nothing somebody can't make a little worse and sell a little cheaper, and that's exactly what's happened to those houses. And so we believe we can deliver a superior product faster and cheaper. So that's kind of the state of the union. Hope that was enough. I'm trying to talk fast.
Well, you did leave one thing out, which is, you know, as Vulcan evolves, I think you guys have Vulcan 2 now.
Oh, Vulcan 2, that's right.
Yeah, so as Vulcan 2 evolves, and maybe it becomes Vulcan D, Vulcan Defense, or whatever the defense grade application or iteration of that product is, how does SBIR funding help you guys accomplish that goal?
So there's a few things that SBIR funding does. Number one, like we would be doing this work anyway. It's not like we would give up without SBIR, but we think this is an important solution for humanity. It's called the global housing crisis, whether in the private sector or in the defense sector, sort of human lives hang in the balance. And so the faster we can get this done, sort of the better for everyone. So it's an accelerant. And then also it's really validating for us out in the private markets to have a customer and a partner in the defense sector, right? You kind of get this halo effect with other investors, because they're assuming the Department of Defense, and they have, I think we've hosted several hundred military personnel at our office now. And so the VCs appreciate the amount of vetting that goes into getting through a SBIR or having a defense partnership. So both the acceleration of the development of the technology itself and the halo effect that comes with working with the Department of Defense.
So you use the word accelerant. I love that, because I think that the SBIR Phase 1 program can be an accelerant for capabilities and accelerate those capabilities into the hands of customers. You also talked about investing. So I want Larson to talk about Harpoon's investment thesis, how you see dual use playing a role in what makes a company attractive to you, and kind of your,
Sure. Thank you. I think that you actually did a great job. Your value proposition and how you describe your go-to-market strategy is really representative of the types of things that we look for. And I think that the key distinction there, as a venture firm, what we stood up to invest in is the intersection of where there's a mass market commercial applicability and a mass market defense or national security or federal applicability. And that's not everything. There's a lot of necessarily very defense-oriented bespoke solutions. Jets, boats, large combat vehicles, all these things that really don't have a lot of applicability in the commercial sector unless you're a narco. And we're not unfortunately investing in those. Anyways, so the things that you're describing really hit the nail on the head for our type of a strategy. And so we generally draw a few distinctions. And first and foremost, conventional wisdom still with these startups who are pursuing large commercial markets is that the defense ecosystem still is too difficult of a customer to work with. And frankly, I think it's one of the great things that AFWERX is doing as an organization is to buck that conventional wisdom. And the word's still not out there yet. So really, as we think about like one of our value adds to the venture ecosystem is we want to identify companies where based on our personal experience or insights from hanging out and getting the insights from people in this room, where that intersection really is before a company may even know it. So our goal would be to approach a company and to say something along the lines of like, we believe in your large-scale commercial enterprise go-to-market strategy, but we also see a parallel or tangential opportunity in the federal space. And oh, by the way, things are changing. Things aren't the way they used to be in terms of 24-month sales cycles to actually start working with an end user or a customer. You can work through Tony and the Spark cells to actually engage through a SBIR phase 1 to find end user demand. And that's fundamentally changing everything, to include in the venture ecosystem, in my opinion. No longer is it such where you just have to wait and monitor Fed BizOps to see if something drops for you, whether you can even apply. You can actually apply with what you actually have commercially and validate through end user demand and feedback that there's a there for your business. And I think that's paradigm changing. I really do. And I think there's very few, if not no, venture firms that really acknowledge that yet. And so that's really where we're trying to bridge the gap.
So what's, just to dig into that a little bit more, what's the sweet spot for layering venture capital into a SBIR or grant-funded project? And how would, depending on where along the pipeline that project is, how would it affect how you would value that company for an investor?
Sure. There's various schools of thought. I'll give you the way that we think about it and then give you a couple other ways that other people think about it. And I don't think either is wrong or right necessarily. So for where we want to play, we generally want to play at the Series A stages, which generally speaking in the venture ecosystem means there is at least an MVP, some early customers, the product's working, the team is sort of working, so it's time to accelerate it, put some JP8, if you will, onto the fire to have that thing accelerate. And so we really want to play at the Series A stage primarily. And so for us, I think that a SBIR phase 2 really is very helpful to a company at that late seed or Series A stage, because generally speaking, if they don't have anything that's working yet, the defense customer's sort of screwed. And so we just, we need to see that in order to have conviction ourselves to de-risk the investment, because we don't want to invest in something and have it turn out that it doesn't work and it's like not gonna work. So we need to see a little bit of that validation. There's an alternative school of thought where other people may invest a little bit earlier. So I guess backing up a little bit, we want to invest roughly the same amount as an actual SBIR award. $1 million, $1.5 million is sort of our sweet spot. We're not trying to lead investments. We're trying to participate alongside upper echelon other venture firms. So if there's going to be hypothetically an $8 million round that's raised, we want to be like 1 or 1.5 of that. We're not trying to lead the round and price it. And that's really what we're trying to enter. But I think that there's a lot of other schools of thought. I think that a lot of companies can actually bootstrap and get into a SBIR phase 2 and actually get off the ground without much venture financing, and thus they take less dilution. Alternatively, they could raise venture at an earlier stage in their business, but obviously the earlier you go, the higher likelihood of failure because there's more risks involved. And so some people invest a smaller amount for higher percentage ownerships at that point in time. We've chosen strategically to invest roughly at the Series A stage and to participate alongside other tier ones at that strata.
That's awesome. All right, Matthew. So this event today is all about the SBIR program. And everybody who showed up here today has kind of gone through what is an evolving but still kind of a more traditional SBIR program. But I think y'all are looking to shake that up a little bit. So tell us some of the stuff that AFWERX specifically wants to do to change how companies engage with the SBIR program in general.
Yes, thank you, Kevin. Let me start where we started at in the beginning of 18.2 when we did this. We thought, okay, we would leverage the entrepreneur spirit. So we brought on 40+ companies, and we just said, go cold call people. That did not work too well, as you can imagine. But we actually thought that might have some traction, but that was more of a messaging to the DoD. They just didn't understand what the SBIR was. So we go into 18.3, and we start leveraging a little bit of what's called needs IDs, where the units can identify problems areas, and we can post that, but then also we were doing a lot of manual matching. That wasn't sustainable, as you can imagine. So we go into 19.1 and we say, hey, how do we leverage focus areas? So where we have program offices with real sustainment tail dollars that can host problem areas that they're looking for technologies, and then they are the ones that actually put people on phase 2s. So we had 17 of those. And the model is that they're starting to go into it, which called pitch days. So the future is we will work with the program offices, work with people who want to sponsor focus areas. We'll open the funnel for phase 1s. Those companies will come in, and then they'll be invited to these pitch days to go to phase 2. In addition, one of the things that Tony and I thought was, that's great from a top-down level, but we're still talking about the end user, all airmen. So how can we leverage the Spark cells and his network that he has built up to reach out to them to still engage with this SBIR companies? And that's what this is bringing those Spark cells and the PO offices so those two can start talking, and then talking with the third point of the triangle is talking to the companies as well to get those conversations and working towards a phase 2. The model is going to go even further, where we're going to have 20.1, we're going to have a joint SBIR working with the Army, Navy, SOCOM, NGA, and a couple of others, where we all come together with our problem sets, and now we're just finding DoD customers, and then we'll be evaluating and sort of having pathways to each of the, because sometimes, frankly, some companies just frankly deal better with Army or Navy of their technology and use. And right now we have to do a sort of a partnership way where we have an Air Force partners with the Army partner, and we're the lead just so we can have an Air Force customer. So those are ways. Going forward, there's going to be more pitch days, and then we are even working on the demand signal is there, so we're going to look at doing mega phase 2s if we can get it approved. And that is basically an uncapped phase 2. So if a program office brings some money, another unit brings some money, and then a VC like Larson brings some money, it will be uncapped for the contract. So it's possible to get a $20, $30 million infusion of cash. And where that is useful is, for instance, with space, they need a lot of capital, or dealing with aircraft, they need a lot of capital up front to do that prototyping.
So back to Jason. You guys got a phase 1 the traditional way, and then you got a phase 2 the traditional way. Tell us, how'd you find that customer? What was that like?
You say we got the phase 2 the traditional way. I think, especially with AFWERX, some of that like hand-holding and kind of having like internal champions to help you navigate the process, we're beginning to get put in place, and I am so like very thankful for that. I wish this had existed 1 year ago when we first started this conference. I mean, this is wonderful to sort of put the entrepreneurs and the potential customers in the same room. So kudos for doing this. But even with like shepherds and handholders and internal champions, like it was hard. I mean, we went to the Pentagon twice. I'm not joking. We've had like, we were trying to count the other day, like 12 generals in the office, and then we'd find a customer who was maybe excited, but they didn't feel technically competent to sign off on it. So go to the Pentagon and talk to the Air Force's chief scientist, and the chief scientist wants the engineers to come take a peek, and it's like, it left to our own device. As a startup, like, we have 18 people, and like most of them are engineers, and they have things to engineer. It would have been impossible. And so it was wonderful for us, but I actually think like this is a bonus, I think, to the Air Force and the Department of Defense, because like I'm getting my master's degree in space resources, and most of my classmates are in aerospace, and their jokes are like the SLS rocket. I'll pick on NASA since this is Air Force, so I won't pick on Air Force, but like that rocket is like approaching like a decade late and like billions and billions of dollars over budget. And by the time it's finally ready, it'll be the worst rocket on the market. Like SpaceX will be landing rockets. And in fact, so some of my classmates work for said company. And it's better for their company that it goes that way. Their company would have made less money to be on time and on budget. So they're like not motivated at all. And so having some young, scrappy startups in the ecosystem, I think is going to provoke this sort of like, everybody better sit up straight because like that contract's not a monopoly anymore. So I think there's going to be this mutual benefit that comes from like developing this ecosystem. So there you go.
Tony, Jason's describing having to go to the Pentagon. Oh my God. Yeah, all of us who wore the uniform, and even some of us who didn't, sometimes when you're in the Pentagon, you think it's the greatest place in the world to be, but then when you leave, you're like, man, did I really just do that for that long? So nobody wants to go to the Pentagon. That's a short story. But so tell me how you guys are keeping people from having to go to the Pentagon or having to go, to Travis or having to go to wherever to find a customer.
Right, and so, what we're really trying to do is trying to empower more airmen to participate in this SBIR process. So to demystify it. So a lot of this comes to, we're educating the non-traditional community, but there's also a lot of internal education that's happening. Telling people that it's okay to sign an MOU. I mean, honestly, a junior enlisted troop, a senior airman could sign an MOU. That is a demand signal. That is someone that wants to use a system. Like a chief scientist could sign the exact same thing. The MOU template that we're using is vetted by the top lawyers in the Air Force, which is awesome. So that template, for everybody to know, is on the AFWERX website, the SBIR dropdown. So use that template. It might get updated. I don't know. We'll see. But anyways, so use that template. And for the people wearing the blue lanyards out there, you can sign them. And you can support a company. If you say that you like this technology, if you see this making your life suck less, if this makes you more mission capable, sign that MOU for that company. And if you truly believe it, hey, have your boss sign it and your boss's boss. This is how we can get and introduce new technology into the DoD. So yeah, so what we are trying to do is a distributed innovation model, essentially. And so what it allows for is a lot more people, because we know our centralized, whether it's the program offices or research centers, they're doing great work. But they can't handle the volume of companies that we have coming through the pipeline. So we have to use a distributed model and trust and support multiple levels of people to sign MOUs.
So I want to follow up on that a little bit. So Matthew talked about we're going to get joint SBIRs, Army, Air Force, maybe Homeland Security, maybe other users that want to use the same technology. And I'm looking at my man Patrick over here. Patrick Hitchens, another Fit Rankings, another Capital Factory portfolio company that just graduated to phase 2. I personally tried to help Patrick get an Army Reserve customer to use his product and sign the MOU template. And we edited it. We took out all the Air Force language, put in the language. And this is a unit. This is an organization that I knew very well. I used to be the director of operations for this unit. I know the sergeant major. I know the commander. I know all these people. I know they're lawyers, because guess what? It's an organization of lawyers, and I'm a lawyer as well. And they freaked out when they saw that thing. Like, the Army's like, I'm not signing this. I have no idea if this is legal. I have no idea if we can join this. How are you guys solving that problem? How are you guys going to get you want airmen? I mean, the Army's not going to let a staff sergeant sign this thing. They're going to have, a brigade commander or a colonel or somebody sign this thing. But like, how are you going to make sure that they know that it's okay to sign it?
So, I mean, it's honestly going to be FOMO, that fear of missing out. And as you see, the early adopters in this ecosystem essentially getting free money. So, from the Air Force customer or end user perspective, SBIR dollars come out of a different pot that is not their money. So it's awesome. So that's why a lot of bases love it, and it's access to R&D money that typical operational bases don't have. And so as certain wing commanders sign MOUs and they see all this great technology coming, they see people like Larson and Harpoon and Will, if he's in the room, come in, and there's actual venture capitalists that are interested in this problem set, and then they have top-tier technology come in, and then from the peer level, they're like, hey, how'd you do that? What are you doing? How are you getting that money? And that's how we're going to slowly start to change that activity.
I just want to add to that that FOMO that Tony speaks about is real. So, and I wish this was around when I was a lieutenant in active duty, because I would be playing the game exactly how this lieutenant that's signed about 9 of these things for companies. And guess how many were awarded? About 8 of them. So you're a superstar now at your base because you're solving all your base's problems with companies to solve everything across your base. And you can go to your wing commander and say, I got this all licked. This is good. And that's exactly what he's doing. That is, people are going to start hearing those stories, so we're going to start working on messaging, start working on these success stories with airmen, and start telling that to everyone. And that is going to be real. People are going to start coming in on this just because they feel like they're missing out.
And the last point on that is, guess what? A lot of these projects are going to fail. Let's just be honest, right? You know what? We have 100 companies here. Is there going to be 100 winners? No, there isn't. But also on the internal side, that risk aversion, we're messaging it that there's a high risk of failure. However, the disproportionate upside, if it is a success, that's what we're going to go after, and that's how we're going to get our ROI long term.
If I chime in there? I think that's a really important point that aligns really well with the venture ecosystem and the entrepreneurs that are pursuing venture backing. Not every business is a venture-backed business, and that's okay. Certain businesses are better suited for progressive scaling, but other businesses, if you really want to change like something rapidly, there are certain criteria that fall within that. And generally speaking, like in our own venture portfolio, realistically, half of those things are probably going to go 1x or 0. And that is obviously everyone's like, oh my God, that sounds terrible. You must be a massive failure. But the interesting thing about the venture space is it doesn't matter really at the end of the day how many zeros you have if you have one real winner. And that's like grand slam, clear the bases, and then some. So really, it's interesting when you see the best venture capitalists in the world, they're the ones who have the one Facebook or the one Snapchat, the one Google, the one Oracle, like whatever it is. And nobody ever talks about the losers. It's very similar to baseball where you can, hit 3 out of 10 and you're going to the Hall of Fame. And so in that sense, I think this is a really interesting point to bring up, that since you guys are pursuing technologies that have an asymmetric upside for the base, there's no guarantee of success. But if there is success here, this could be game-changing for the entire Air Force. That aligns perfectly with risk capital / venture capital, and why I think that there's going to be more and more opportunities for venture capitalists to come in here and form unintended sort of like joint venture partnerships with the AFWERX crew here.
So let's talk about that. Let's talk about these joint partnerships, bringing in a bunch of different customers on a potential solution to a commercial problem and a military problem. So Matthew, can you describe, just to make sure we flatten the knowledge here, everybody understands what are the components that go into a phase 3 that is a successful transition from phase 2?
The way that we currently view a phase 3 is using non-SBIR dollars to fund that. Now, what we are working on is tracking and measuring, because ultimately, any of these programs that you're dealing with in the DoD space is going to be measured on how much capability are they transferring to and putting in the hands of the warfighter and the airmen, and measuring all that off of that. We're gonna take questions?
We'll do questions here in just a minute.
So that's really, that's why we're encouraging on this next round to put a lot of emphasis on the sustainment tail. That's why the PEOs are involved. To phase 3s, we're counting that as transition, as, hey, we're using non-SBIR dollars to gain this traction. It's just the commercial side. The more momentum and traction you can get in the market, the better, because people are going to start using them more and validating your product, and that's how we're treating it.
So is there any space for accelerators to play to help? General Wilson was here a few months ago and indicated that he wants accelerators to play a bigger role in how you guys are achieving this. So what space do you see accelerators playing? And this was Steve's question, but his flight got canceled, so now you're taking it.
So Steve is our accelerator lead. So we partner with Techstars up in Boston. That's our flagship accelerator that we run. So it's really interesting. How do we run an accelerator program in order to do just that, but in the DoD space? Yes, I mean the short answer is yes. I mean it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all, or we should use accelerators for everything. But I think accelerators should exist. And from the AFWERX standpoint, we never want to be the organization that runs accelerators. What we want to do is own one flagship one, learn lessons based on our activities, and then teach other people how to do it. Because guess what? AFWERX is just a blip on the innovation radar right now. We have good leadership support. We have a lot of momentum, but we're gonna lose steam just like LPs and records did, right? At some point. So what we have to do is learn the lessons while we do have that runway, and then teach other organizations, whether it's the PEOs, whether it's the managed comms, to use the accelerator model to augment their SBIR process.
Quickly touch on that. There's two spaces I see for accelerators. One is one of the strategic goals for Dr. Roper and his office is right now, if you're looking to see where the capital's coming from, and so a lot of these startups is coming from, Silicon Valley, Boston, and Texas. But he would really like to see, and his office would like to see more distribution throughout the U.S. So building up more of these startup communities that are around the bases, so the base can leverage local businesses to help them with some of their issues that they're facing. So I see a distributed model where we partner with someone that can train a distribution of accelerators throughout the U.S. to work in those regions where those bases and startup communities are. Another avenue I see that we're really lacking in is right now we're taking the SBIR model and putting that with the STTR, which is basically, now I just have an idea as a company and I want to partner with a university to do research and development. We're building out that model so that gap between STTR and SBIR, they'll need to be filled with some kind of accelerator space to teach those individuals how to deal with the DoD, because that's still an issue, is learning the processes, how to deal with our workflow that we do, and building out that.
So let's talk mechanics a little bit of how you might put multiple different components together on a project and what the numbers would look like for the company. So you do a joint SBIR, maybe it's an Air Force, it's an AFWERX lead, $750K. During the phase one, Army comes and says, yes, I want to be a part of this one too, and they contribute $1 million in SBIR funds. What's the impact if then Walmart or Microsoft says, hey, this product sounds interesting to me. I'd like to be part of this project, and we're going to contribute a couple of $100,000. How does that work? Does that layer into the project well? Is that a competing interest? Does that help a company maybe have a strategy to transition to phase 3 where they've got commercial customers and military customers?
Absolutely. One of our strongest indicators, because we're really just buying down risk. As far as other third parties are betting on the success of this company. So if another DoD user brings in funds, we can help either leverage those funds, or if it doesn't count as leveraging, we can at least use our contracting vehicle to layer their funds on top of the phase 2 that they're doing. And then it's a definite signal from a non-government investor, that like a Walmart or a VC that's bringing in money that will match 1-for-1. That's a huge signal to us, because that essentially they are believing in this company and buying down that risk for us. Because ultimately, one of the paradigm shifts that we have taken is the philosophy of how we look at businesses. Is we aren't looking to write a detailed requirement and you create a business for that detailed requirement. It's more you share your commercial business with us, and we'll see if we can adapt that commercial product to fit a DoD need.
One of the interesting things, though, on that, like let's say a Walmart or a big corporation comes in, we've actually had this before, is where they don't want that company to work with the DoD because they know that's going to take a lot of bandwidth from them. So we've actually had companies withdraw their SBIR award because a big corporation came in and said, hey, we'll do business with you, but not if you do business with the DoD. Not because they were un-American or unpatriotic or anything, but they just knew that was going to be a bandwidth suck from them. And so it's funny. I mean, it's kind of bittersweet. Like on once it's like, oh man, that would have been great technology, right? On the other side of the coin, it's like, wow, we're picking some pretty incredible companies. So it was a really fascinating thing.
One of the companies that went to the New York pitch day for the Air Force got bought out that morning by a big DoD contractor. So they were no longer a small company at that point. One of a success that we're seeing is like if you do the tech accelerator and then you come to the SBIR process and then you're able to get other contracts through the DoD, you're able to grow your business commercially, and a company recently IPO'd as well. So.
And I'm guessing that these types of situations would be very attractive to you as an investor, and those types of funding strategies would be very attractive to you as you're building Vulcan D or whatever the next iteration is.
100%. Absolutely. I think what's interesting, the hard part with all of this is aligning everybody's incentives. And I think that you guys hit on some great anecdotes there. One that was perhaps left out is what happens if, I don't know, the Army brings in some money and contributes to a project, but it's an Air Force SBIR. I know that's one that's been a challenge previously, is like, who's in charge of it? Like, the Army's putting some skin in the game. They want something out of it, but it's an Air Force project. But then we've got, like, Walmart, and then you got, like, the VC being like, WTF, man, like, let's scale this thing and, like, rock and roll. And, like, there's all these conflicting issues here. So it really, hats off to the AFWERX team, who's done a great job of mitigating a lot of that and explaining to other services how to work together and do so tactfully. I don't have a great answer in terms of how industry can better learn from this experience and accept it, but I do know that things are changing, and there is more of an opportunity and an understanding that it's easier to work now with the DoD than ever before, and a lot of that credit goes to AFWERX.
Yeah, I mean, I can very practically say yes. Like, my company was very interested in like a private-public kind of partnership with our technology. In fact, we're exploring that right now, that there's a possibility, like if we can find like capital in the private markets, there might be some matching funds with AFWERX or some other partner in the DoD. And so we weren't sure how that would be received by our investor, because we're sort of not scheduled to have a fundraise quite yet. And so we didn't know what that would signal to our investor community. So we said, hey guys, there's maybe an opportunity, so stay tuned. But we're just kind of trying to see out there to our internal investors, would this be of interest? We were like a unanimous, like, hell yes. It was sort of like, I don't know how we're going to pick, like, who gets to go in on the next round. So, like, back to that halo effect I mentioned earlier, that's exactly the signal our VCs, that's how they viewed it. It was like, this wasn't an unscheduled fundraise. It was a huge opportunity that, of course, in their mind, we should take advantage of. And there is some, like, navigation. We have the Marine Corps who's also interested. And so there's definitely some navigation, but those are, like, champagne problems. I mean, those are winners' problems. Like, companies on balance, like, it's much more rare to go out of business because of customer demand than the opposite. So I'll take the problem.
And so, I mean, looking from the DoD side, so, on the demand side of the equation, so, there's a lot of awesome technology out here, and that technology can pivot to a lot of different user needs. And so, what I would caution you is, you have to understand that some of these companies are very early stage, and if 10 different people tell them 10 slightly different requirements, they might deliver nothing. However, if just one thing is demanded out of them that they can laser focus on, that might increase the probability of the success of your problem, but also set that company up for success. So as a DoD partner and as a cooperative participant in this ecosystem, remember, just more people at the supper table isn't always better, because maybe someone, it might turn into something where nothing is delivered at all.
Okay, I think we're ready to take some audience questions. I don't see any Capital Factory people. Do we have a mic cube? If not, I'll just walk around. Who's got a question? Hang on.
So how do you help companies? Because there are n number of companies, whether it is in South Carolina or Silicon Valley, who doesn't understand the defense problem. Because I submitted like 6 BIRs and all for Department of Energy and 4 for Navy and everything. In every debrief, we get the same answer. Your technology is good, but we don't know you can commercialize it, or how do you prove yourself out there. So 2-year-old company, a seed fund technically stands for it, but what I have personally observed is that, it's hard for a 2-year-old company to go and get the real commercialization or get back, or what is your related work? So we don't have an answer, or how do you think that small businesses can typically cross that phase? Or is it the standard that actually happens?
So, I mean, just to start out, I would say it is difficult. Like all this stuff, like as low of a barrier to entry that we've tried to create, it's not perfect. And guess what? We're going to miss out on opportunities. So I think it's coming to events like this, talking to people, and trying to find, do that true customer discovery to find product market fit for whatever your offering is. But yeah, not everything's going to make it through.
Entrepreneur to entrepreneur, that's exactly what we did. We did not set out actually looking for a government customer. We just sort of got a rumor that there might be. So we spent like a good amount of resources and time like hosting tours through our lab and like listen way before we applied or put forward like an application of any sort. Like we had a really good sense of like the shape of what AFWERX or somebody might be asking for from us. So like think about it as customer discovery, just like in the private markets. That's a great piece of advice.
The way we view early stage companies that are pre-revenue, let's say in that aspect, so you're having difficulty getting that that traction. So it helps our team is trying to buy down some of that risk, of taking that chance on you. And there's multiple ways you could do that. You can try and get your private investors to get in money to invest in you, or if you build up enough demand signal from the DoD partners, that starts sending a signal to us saying, hey, we really want to at least try this company out. And so we'll start looking at trying to bring that company on.
Typically, it takes anywhere like 8 to 9 months of work for a small business just to understand the problem. Do you think that would be the reason?
When you say the problem, here's what I like to tell commercial business, startups is, you should be going after a commercial customer. You should already know the customer profile that you're going after. I guarantee you there's probably a very similar customer profile in the DoD. So you don't need to change up and hunt for the problems. What problem are you trying to solve with your company? Start articulating that message to the DoD as saying, hey, we're looking for this sort of problem set. Do you know who has that? So I would take that approach instead of trying to conform to their problems on that.
Next question.
So you mentioned how the goal is to transition to phase 3 with not SBIR dollars. And one of the thoughts that I had in mind was, is your metric for success those monies compared to the SBIR monies? Or like, how do you guys think about the quantifiable metric for success? In the commercial markets, it's like the impact to the market cap or, the margin or blah, blah, blah. But I don't really understand the warfighters' metrics for success.
The metrics of success it depends on what organization you're talking to as far as a DoD innovation space of how they measure transition. For instance, there's some organizations in this space, if they just put you on contract, that's a transition. But realistically, it's getting to the warfighter. So as far as SBIR dollars, the way that AFWERX is starting to measure that is matching to private funds like Larson's. If he puts in money, how much are we matching and leveraging of his funds? How many DoD customer dollars are we leveraging and matching in SBIR money to that? Because those are the signals that say, I believe in this company, and we can match it with SBIR. And then there's a metrics for, let's transition this to the rest of to the warfighter. Let's get it in their hands. Those are still being developed, because how actually do you, if it's not quantifiable, how do you make it into a number that can be measured?
I've actually got a question kind of across the panel. I ran a intellectual property working group for NDIA, and there were a couple of cases that came up. One in particular was from a company called AFWERX, who had got a very good deal going with the venture capitalists. And I'll tell you the story that because of this DoD rule, Everything collapsed. The company went out of business. And the problem there was a mismatch, and it was to do with the authorization and consent clause in the Federal Acquisition Regulations, which I understand is statute, so goes, above all your pay grades too. But from the perspective of the VC community, what happened here was that a company developed a very exciting new technology. The Army wanted to buy it. But once they had actually submitted the proposal, the prime contractor who had access to that technology used it even though it was patented. And because of the authorization and consent clause, any defense contractor can use any U.S. patent, even U.S. patents the government hasn't invested in. And they indemnify the contractors that use that. So as a small business, we obviously face a lot of competition, but that's kind of a disincentive for patenting. And it's certainly, in Tenebrae's case, it was a huge disincentive for any further investment from any venture capitalist. So could you comment on your experience? I mean, is that situation going to get any better going forward?
I don't have a good answer for that because I'm not in the military and these guys are, and so they can, But I would say a couple schools of thought, just from my perspective on what the AFWERX guys are doing right, is they are, very accommodating from an IP perspective. Like you foundationally need to show up with something that is already working in the commercial sector, and they have this concept of green paint. So if you have a Audi car and it goes really fast, and to make it work for the Air Force, you got to paint it green. Technically, the green paint is like the layer that of IP in question, not everything that's underlining it. I'm not a lawyer, our moderator is, so he'd probably be the best person to answer. But the other thing about that, sorry to put you on the spot, is ultimately innovation is moving so fast that one school of thought that I've heard commonly from investors is if you're overly worried about filing for patents, generally speaking, you're behind the market. Not that you shouldn't do it, but the fact of the matter is if you file for it, somebody can copy it. Somebody in China can copy it. So you might as well just keep improving your technology so rapidly. And I think that's where a lot of startups have an advantage, is just rapidly evolving the technology and using the innovator's dilemma for your own benefit, so that you can take massive market share from a large incumbent. But really, I think this is maybe a policy question for the Air Force guys that they may or may not know the answer to. But the entrepreneur probably has a great perspective too.
I'll talk a little bit before Tony hits it on his as well. That is a big, that's one of the number one questions we usually get from startups, is this, this IP concern. And from our perspective, it's once we get the message out to you and really have the conversations, you'll find that it's really not that big of a concern once you have all the information. One of the IP attorneys that works at the staff level for the Air Force in that GC office, she's a liaison with us. She gives us all that guidance. So when a startup has those questions, we can have her reach out to you, or you reach out to her, and she'll explain all that. But here's what it comes down to. When we're going into phase 2 and you want to start asserting data rights and talking about the IP, it's a negotiation and talking. And there are incidences, people in this room that have phase 2s that asserted all data rights. And they still got a contract awarded. And according to the GC, when I asked her that question, she says that situation she doesn't know of any situation that has occurred in the Air Force when she was referring to that. Okay. Well, I would love to connect you with her to talk about that, so how she can explain further to us the message to startups as well.
Thanks. I'll chat with you guys offline about this. We'll figure it out.
We have another question over here.
All right, so my question is from the operational innovator perspective. So for the entrepreneurs, the founders, the venture guys, you guys are looking for exits that generate profitability and value on that side of the house. for us, an exit looks like transitioning whatever technology solution we've worked on with you guys to some kind of sustainment so it remains fielded and continues to grow and evolve and meet the warfighter need. I was sitting in the breakout with the program office perspective a little bit before this, and it seems like a lot of good intent, but still lots of unanswered questions. From the Air Force side, and I'd be interested to hear from the rest of the panel too, what are your perspectives on how we're going to be able to sustain this innovation inside the Air Force going forward after we get through these SBIRs, phase 2s, and it has to transition to legacy systems for budgeting, acquisition, et cetera?
I'm the entrepreneur here. What I see going on from my perspective as the entrepreneur is this is the Department of Defense getting its feet wet in venture. And venture is inherently risky. And so part of it is going to be a lot of these government contractors are used to things like, I order a thing from Boeing, I get a thing from Boeing. And so a lot of these money is going out into the SBIR program. As he said, some of it's going to fail. And so having an appetite for risk and failure on that side. But as the entrepreneur, we're eyes wide open that this needs to turn into something long-term useful. Or it's been a misadventure for everyone probably.
Our ultimate goal, and this is what Dr. Roper, will talk about, is to get it to a program of record for that sustainment piece. That's why the POs are involved. That's why these sustainment offices are involved, is to have those real congressionally line-ited, budgeted programs that the POs are going to execute and have allocations to execute on dollars. So it's our job to find those on-ramps and signal to them early, hey, this technology is there. Can we find a pathway to bringing it? The demand is there. How do we make this a program of record? Sometimes it's easier. I mean, we had a phase 1 company that just happened to get in a briefing with Dr. Roper, and he made it a program of record on the spot. So there's ways there and to do that.
But I also think it's kind of philosophy based too, right? So we have this paradigm that we're in where things have to become a program of record to transition, and we all know that those fiscal cycles are probably a lot longer than the relevance of that technology. So I also do believe that there's a paradigm shift that has to happen of how we think about the technology that we're fielding and how we procure and acquire systems. I mean, it's the long game. I mean, we're talking about congressional action in order to make it happen. But those are the type of things and the conversations we need to have in order to move the system and shift that paradigm in a way that makes us more agile as a force.
And I'd just like to note, a lot of these tours now that what we're messaging and getting now is now these congressional members, these staff delegates are coming to us. What do you need from policy from us to make this happen? Because we want to make this happen. And so that is on that pathway to have that congressional change to back up some of these initiatives that we're going towards.
Kind of seems like in the new gray zone, if you will, that if we have shooting stars, they burn after a while. That's fine. Let's get the next shooting star and just get shooting stars. Maybe we don't always want a program of records.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. It's like our tech refresh rate. I mean, it should be at the rate of relevance. I mean, if the commercial market can do it, if the new iPhone comes out, we should be able to buy it. If the next, whatever widget is that can move the needle, an advanced our mission comes out, we should be able to procure it in an agile manner.
The government doesn't have that mindset, though, right? I mean,
We're moving in that direction.
Maybe less than that 20% Jeff was talking about.
So this has been absolutely fantastic. Very just personally excited to see all of y'all here. I really want to thank AFWERX. I want to thank Tony. I know you guys worked really, really hard to put this Collider event together, and seeing all the connections happen out there is Capital Factory stoked. I'm personally stoked. I hope we get to do a whole lot more of these. I want to thank you guys for coordinating your jackets. That was really good. And the audience participation. The Austin guys know that you don't wear jackets in this building, but that's okay.
I remember not to put on a t-shirt this morning.
All right, so a couple of concluding remarks and admin remarks here. So there's going to be a social up on the 8th floor immediately following this. Capital Factory is hosting a community happy hour. Obviously, everyone here is invited. There's going to be some food. There may or may not be a cocktail or two that will drive some further collaboration. The start time for tomorrow is 8:30, but the doors will be open at 8 o'clock. And then finally, up on the 8th floor, next to the drinks that may or may not be there, there's going to be a sign-up sheet for anybody that wants to take a VIP tour tomorrow. We've got, I believe, 3 scheduled. So there'll be a sign-up sheet if anybody wants a full tour of Capital Factory. You can sign up for that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I also wanted to thank Jason and Larson for joining us right here. You're going to hear more about Jason. Their company's actually prototyping out how to work with multiple agencies with the DoD and how we hand off these projects. And then Larson with being one of the first out there with the VCs to really buy in on these programs. So thank you.